Welcome back, Kaiju fans, and this is going to be my initial review of the Cloverfield Paradox that came out an hour and 50 minutes ago from now. And I have just finished watching this film for the first time. And I'm going to tell you that this movie is absolutely insane. 10 years I have waited for this movie, because I was one of those few people who went and saw the original Cloverfield 10 years ago in theaters when it dropped, and is waiting for some kind of explanation to the kaiju since then. And I'm going to tell you now, before we get into this, that this movie will offer you the explanation you are looking for. This movie is not a prequel. This movie is not a sequel. This is a film that is happening at the exact same time in the same one of the same universes that the original Cloverfield was set in, and could also partially explain what is happening in 10 Cloverfield Lane at the same time if we use some logical thinking based off of what we know from this film. Now, this movie is about a space station. Those previous rumors were absolutely correct. The previous name of God Particle makes absolute sense with this film, and it was probably the working title the entire time. This is set in the exact same moments that the original Cloverfield film transpired, when that movie was released 10 years ago. This is kind of strange because of differences in technology from now till then, but it's something that we can move past because it's brilliant anyways. The universe that the original Cloverfield film is happening in is an energy-starved Earth where basically countries are at each other's throats due to the lack of energy and a new energy crisis, having mostly every major country on the verge of war, threatening invasion to the United States for oil, and vice versa. So the space station, which is called the Cloverfield Station, is an accelerator, or a particle accelerator, off Earth that is testing experimental energy sources via the particle accelerator, with the goal of creating an unlimited and sustainable source of energy to be used back on Earth to resolve the crisis at hand. Thus the name God Particle, the all-powerful particle energy source to alleviate the needs of man. That's where that name has come from. Makes perfect sense now. This film, basically in the plot, I'm just going to go over it briefly, is that there is a paradox, that basically there's a conspiracy show going on that the residents of the space station that are testing the particles see, and it's a conspiracy theorist. Everyone thinks he's crazy. He's discussing the possibility of the Cloverfield paradox, which is when they unleash this massive amount of energy, this amount of energy could rip the fabric of the universe and could collide multiple universes and unleash monsters, demons, basically cataclysmic destruction on Earth. Everyone thinks he's joking. Yeah. You know, the regular conspiracy kind of reaction people have. One of the crew members that's paying attention to this is basically told not to watch that because it's not true. And they go forward with their experiments, and they don't necessarily work. One of their final experiments seemingly begins to work, I guess I would say, and then there's a particle overload and the station begins to break down. Gravity gets thrown out of balance, everyone goes everywhere, and when they all resume normal fields of function, the Earth is not in their scannable region. They cannot find the Earth. It's completely disappeared, which this is what we knew of the original storyline of God Particle, is that the space station was supposed to basically end up in a situation where Earth was no longer seen. And then strange things start to happen on this space station once this situation has been resolved. They need to find the Earth. Their gyro is missing that locates them in the solar system, and a crew member that they did not have on the ship before the firing is found stuck inside of a wall, which ties into I believe, the World War II experiments with magnetic coils on battle cruisers that, when were fired up, a strange fog enveloped the ship, and some of the crew members were found fused with the machinery and the walls of the ship. That's a crazy story. You'll have to look into that sometime. But that's essentially what that situation is based off of. So they're kind of going for this realistic vibe of the weird things that have happened in the past that are relatable to this scenario. But at the same time, on Earth, because this is taking place during the events of the first Cloverfield film, this realization of the Cloverfield paradox comes true, and the monsters and demons are unleashed, which is the kaiju from the Cloverfield franchise. Because our main character, I believe her name was Ava, her husband is back on Earth and he works in a hospital, and he experiences firsthand the initial attack outside of his window in presumably New York, because that's where the first film takes place. And everyone thinks it's the Russian invasion for the oil wars going on initially, and everyone kind of thinks it might be a nuclear attack, but it's clearly not a nuclear attack because it's just small explosions. So he basically goes to the hospital where he works, basically to take an emergency situation patients and be there to care for the patients. And when he gets there, the hospital is completely trampled, and in the dusty, shadowy smoke, there is the shadow of one of the Clover kaiju. And it's just kind of looming above it, making some weird sounds, and he's staring at it just in disbelief. And underneath that, there is a small girl crying, which he takes to evacuate the area. Back on the space station, they have realized that the situation is caused by this Cloverfield paradox that they were briefly under the assumption was maybe a non-likely thing to happen. But now they understand that they've actually been transported to an alternate universe, which is why the new crew member suddenly appeared on the ship in one of the walls. Is she is from that previous universe that they collided into. And in that universe, the Cloverfield space station, the Shepherd that they call it, it failed and crashed into the Earth, and everyone is dead. So that girl is actually the only survivor of that crew, and she has been, her universe, when it collided with the universe of the characters that were familiar in the movie thus far, she got put on that space station, whereas in her universe, her space station crashed. And in her universe, the war has been going on for 14 months, the oil war. So basically that world is completely just being ruined by World War III, for lack of a better term. And they realize that the only way that they can get back to their correct dimension is by firing the space station's particle accelerator again and hoping that it corrects this situation. And they discovered that they're in the other crew members' universe because their gyro was discovered inside the body of one of their crew members, who went insane and had worms teleported inside of him, and he basically exploded all over the place, true Cloverfield fashion, with worms. So that this movie has some very literally disgusting elements in it, so if you're faint of heart, I would genuinely be cautioned watching this, because it's pretty gross sometimes. So they realize that they need to fire the particle accelerator to get back to their dimension, and the girl from the current dimension says, "That's great and all that you guys can get back, but you do realize that taking me with you locks me out of my own world." So she basically agrees to help if she can get the information to make the particle accelerator work correctly and take back to her planet before they fire it in an escape pod, so that essentially she can help them create that form of energy that they may have perfected now, but they obviously have to get back to their own universes first. Back on Earth, Ava's husband has taken the little girl refugee that she's found to a bunker that is similar to the kind of bunker that we've seen in 10 Cloverfield Lane, basically a fallout bunker, except this is a small one-room compartment, not a multi-room complex like we see in 10 Cloverfield Lane, and is essentially trying to figure out where his wife is because he's in communications with basically the ground control for the space station because of that relation, and they're telling him that the space station is missing. It's not destroyed because there's no debris, they just can't find it, and he's basically telling them, hey, find this girl's parents, this is where they are, this is what their name is, tell them that I have this girl. And at the meantime, there's basically a war going on above him with the kaiju, and he's basically looking at his message feed, and it's, can you believe this is happening? And the little girl basically asks, do they know what it is? And he says nobody knows what it is yet. So that's what's going back on happening back on Earth during this time frame. Obviously, we know all of what happens in New York from the original film, so that's where that ends for now, and we go back to the space station where basically a lot of drama happens. The crew more or less discovers what caused their problems in the first place, why their test firing overloaded and teleported them to a different dimension. It was a miscalculation in the moisture of the space station, and they end up losing their crew member that discovered this problem in the process from a water accident, getting blown out to the outside of the space station, and then they try to go forward with the firing afterwards, and some more really, really bad things happen with the space station to the point where the bottom half is breaking off, and if they don't try to separate one of the portions of the station that is being basically it's throwing off the rotation of the entire space station will become ripped apart. So they have to go and separate that. The commander of the space station ends up sacrificing his life to sever that piece because it has to be done manually. We've seen things like this in movies before. It's kind of like a cliche thing that you kind of knew it was coming. And we're down to 4 crew members at this point, which would be our main character, Ava, the girl from the alternate dimension, the doctor, and basically the scientist guy that is responsible for building the space station in the first place. And they're getting ready to fire the station, and the girl from the alternate dimension, it's kind of hard, I'm being slow, it's because it's kind of hard to explain. The girl from the alternate space station and Ava are going to go to Earth, this Earth, the alternate dimension Earth, because Ava wants to save her children that die in her world in an alternate universe, even though she's going to be miserable in the long run, and Ava wants to go back to her Earth to save it. Turns out she doesn't want to do that. She knocks our main character unconscious, steals a gun, and basically is about to shoot up the rest of the people in the space station because there's not enough time to rebuild the space station in her alternate universe, so she has to hijack this one to save her planet, whereas the people from our universe want to get back to their original one. So Ava is forced with the decision of going and saving her kids in an alternate universe, or getting the Shepard space station back to the universe that it belongs in and potentially seeing her husband again. And she ends up doing that, and there's basically a shootout and a fight on the space station where the doctor ends up dead, the girl from the alternate dimension ends up getting jettisoned out of a window, and then the last 2 people left are our main character and the person responsible for building the Shepard. They, in turn, fire the Shepard up again, the Cloverfield space station, after making all the correct adjustments, which gets them back to their current universe, or their original universe, and then once they recalculate what they need to do and fire it up again, the God particle basically works, the machine works, they have the unlimited source of energy, and then they immediately, they tell their control that, and when they kind of hear vague responses from control because they don't know that the world is being attacked by kaiju, they get in an escape pod and they immediately jettison to Earth, and in this moment we go back to her husband on Earth in the bunker, where he receives a phone call from command saying that the space station has been found and they're on their way back to Earth. And at this point he absolutely loses his mind, saying, why would you ask them to come back there? do they even know what's going on here? And they said, no, there was no time. They just jettisoned. They didn't let us explain, more or less. And he is losing his mind because he's basically saying they don't know what's here. They don't know what these things are. And it's at this moment that we go back to the final scene of the movie, which is kind of reminiscent to the original scene of the first Cloverfield movie with the object falling down through the skyline, crashing into the water. At this point, we see the escape pod falling through a veil of clouds, an unknown height of clouds, but the space pod looks very, very small, and when it falls through the clouds and you think that the movie is about to end, a absolutely insane sized Clover kaiju peers up through the clouds and roars for an extended period of time, finally giving us another look at this kaiju that we haven't seen in 10 years, which is absolutely shivers down your spine, incredible. And you also have to take into consideration, we don't know how high these clouds are above the ground, and the cloud line, say in this video, is like here in the screen camera, and this kaiju's head is like the size of my body when it pops through the clouds. So this thing is absolutely massive, and he says they don't know what these things are. So basically, the kaiju from the first Cloverfield movie wasn't alone, according to this film, which is insane, because the Earth is basically being overrun by these kaiju now. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. So, that's kind of like the brief idea of the film. So in turn, from this, we know where the Cloverfield kaiju comes from now. He is, well, more or less, he was awakened, or his species was awakened at some point during the Cloverfield paradox. We can assume that his species is from a different universe or multiverse that was opened up when the Cloverfield paradox was initiated, so that's where they came from. Or they were dormant at the bottom of the sea, which is a possibility because the conspiracy theorist at the beginning says that this could have awakened monsters from the sea. So they could be from there, but we know that they were awakened from this Cloverfield paradox, which is crazy. So that's where they came from, and that we can also assume that at the end of the first Cloverfield film, the shot of Rob, I think is his name, and his girlfriend, whatever, they're on the Ferris wheel, and you see the object crashing in from the side frame. We can presume that this is actually a shot from the alternate universe from the Cloverfield space station crashing into the Earth during the failed test flight. So this ties in that odd shot that doesn't necessarily make too much sense in the context of the film. So that could explain that. Plus, on top of that, with this movie basically intersecting all dimensions, this could explain the alien invasion from 10 Cloverfield Lane as an event that happened in on a different Earth and a different timeline. But another factor of the Cloverfield paradox, as explained in this film, is that it could make changes to the past, the present, and the future, so that it could have basically inserted that alien invasion into the timeline somewhere on Earth in an unknown region. So that film could basically either be an alternate Earth, a future Earth, or a previous Earth where the conflict was resolved, and that's the reason that there's no more resources left, is because resources were exhausted fighting the aliens. Which is insane, the way that could possibly be linked together. Which is one of the reasons I love this movie. People call them plot hole films. I think they're just cool with the way that they try to piece all these different storylines together within this same universe. So that's kind of the way that those are all connected. And that's insane. You can also see a lot of the visual elements implemented from 10 Cloverfield Lane, with like the title screens that have the dragging letters that go down, like in the 10 Cloverfield Lane title cards where the ladders drag down. That font style of the dragging letters is implemented a bunch in this film, so there's that weird connect to that film at the same time. And then one of the other kind of Easter eggs, I would say, is at the end of the first Cloverfield film, Rob is basically recording his last regards on his phone in like a final memento kind of thing before the Hammer Down Protocol basically wipes New York off the map. The husband character in the bunker also does a similar thing. He also pulls out his phone and does a final regards video with his phone in the same exact manner that happens in the first film, just obviously different character, different situation, which is awesome. Those two little kind of like things that link all three of these films together full circle, little keys that make the experience so much cooler for a diehard fan that experienced those films in the past 10 years ago, and what was it, three years ago for 10 Cloverfield Lane. Incredible, absolutely incredible. I love it so much. This film was pretty overwhelming at times. It's not a perfect movie, but it's an enjoyable film to watch, especially for a Cloverfield fan. Now, obviously, being a giant monster fan watching this film, we can all wish that we could see more monster action in this film, but that's not necessarily what this film was supposed to be about. It was supposed to give an explanation to why the events of the first film took place, and potentially why the events of the second film take place, although not explicitly stated that that's the reasoning. So I am just satisfied that we get two shots, one of an ominous shadow version of the kaiju and one of a actual full facial of the kaiju at the end, basically to give us that a look at the kaiju we've been waiting so long to see again. And this could also open up the possibility for the fourth film being some kind of retaliation, some kind of like post kaiju or current like survival on the planet kaiju film, which would be absolutely incredible. But I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this film is amazing, and this is kind of like a off the record right after initial viewing review, so I probably will be doing more videos in the next few days when I have time to process all of this, because it was kind of overwhelming, and I love that. That's not a bad thing, but that's really all I can think of right now. I need to watch it again. I'll probably watch it again, and I don't know if I'll have time tomorrow. Write down some more notes, and then maybe go through some full timeline explanations tomorrow or the next day. So stay tuned for that, and if you like this video, please, it helps my channel out so much if you just leave a like or a comment or anything like that. I'm not saying you have to share it with anybody, because I know that sharing things on social media is difficult for people sometimes. They're self-conscious about their posts, but at least leaving a like or a comment, that helps me out a ton. And I think that'll do it for this review, guys. If you have Netflix, check this movie out as soon as you can. I don't know if it's going to leak online immediately, but I'm sure you'll be able to find it online if you don't have Netflix. But definitely give this movie a watch if you were a fan of the original Cloverfield movie, or if you like 10 Cloverfield Lane. Obviously, this one doesn't tie into that movie the way that it ties into the first one, but for someone like me who's been waiting for 10 years with the weird Adley Gamma conspiracies and all that craziness, that's insane. The last thing I remember that I wanted to talk about is that the crazy conspiracy that the second Cloverfield movie that didn't turn out to be the second Cloverfield movie was going to be about people in the exact same situation, just a different perspective on the attack on the city. Apparently that was true when that came out 7 years ago, that conspiracy. It took 7 years for us to find out the answer to that conspiracy, but it's 100% true. This is the same attack from a different perspective, at least for parts of the movie. So, whoa, craziness. 7-year-old conspiracies confirmed. You heard it here first. Maybe, I don't know. But that's gonna be it for this video, guys. I will catch you all in the next one. Peace out. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. I appreciate it a lot. As always, liking, commenting, and sharing really helps out my channel. And make sure you're subscribed if you want to stay up to date on the latest kaiju news and crisp reviews.